honors you for your glory and your strength, wrapped in endless holiness and the glory of your name, wrapped in endless holiness and the glory of your name. The voice of the Lord, the voice of the Lord echoes above the sea. The voice of the Lord is power displayed. The voice of the Lord falls forest and trees. The voice of the Lord is thundering. The voice of the Lord flashes flames of fire. The voice of the Lord, Shakespeare in the wilderness. The voice of the Lord is arriving with new life, and the voice of the Lord lays waste his creation, all the people. Cry, glory, 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 all the people, everyone in his temple. Cry, glory, 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 all the people, everyone
precious as silver. Made men ride over our heads, passed us through the fire. Yet you brought us out and into riches. Yet you brought us out into fulfillment. Yet you brought us out into abundance.
Good evening. So, quick announcement. Laureen gave this info to Carolyn, and Laureen found out that at 4:37 this morning, that Hadley Grace Jeffries came into the world. That would be Russell and Victoria's little girl here, 7 pounds, 10 ounces, 19 inches long, and she joins Harper. This is Harper's little sister now. So, Russell and Victoria have a new baby, and Laureen's got a new great-grandbaby. So, just wanted to pass along that and celebrate that, the joy of new life and excitement there. So, let's turn to 455 as you're singing In Times Like These. In times like these, you need a Savior. In times like these, you need an anchor. Be very sure, be very sure. Your anchor holds and grips the solid rock. This rock is Jesus, yes, He's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. Be very sure, be very sure. Your anchor holds and grips the solid rock. In times like these, you need the Bible. In times like these, oh, be not idle. Be very sure, be very sure. Your anchor holds and grips the solid rock. This rock is Jesus, yes, He's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. Be very sure, be very sure. Your anchor holds and grips the solid rock. In times like these, I have a Savior. In times like these, I have an anchor. I'm very sure, I'm very sure. My anchor holds and grips the solid rock. This rock is Jesus, yes, He's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. I'm very sure, I'm very sure. My anchor holds and grips the solid rock. We're now to 511, 511. We're doing just the normal verses on this one. Solid rock. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but only lean on Jesus' name, on Christ the Son. sand. When darkness seems to hide his face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. His oath, his covenant, his blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, he then is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Lord, we thank you that we can gather back in your house this evening. Lord, that we can look at your word together. I pray that you would just open our hearts and our minds as we seek to learn more about you as you reveal through your written word. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Off to class. As we get started, so kind of the question I've been asking, or at least I've intended to ask, whether I've asked it or not, remembered or not, but any questions on anything that you've read in the last bit, or even something, a burning question you've always had and you've just never been brave enough to ask, or never came to mind, or... And also, did anybody this morning, in our lesson this morning, did anybody see any of the themes that we talked about a couple weeks ago? This one's just full of it. Deborah's really a fun one, kind of an easy one to look at. I mean, there's just all over it. Yeah, the oak tree, exactly. And we actually have two trees. We have the palm of Deborah, and then we have the oak tree where Jael is camped out at. Yeah, it's up top. Yeah, Deborah's up top between the house of God and the holy place. Yeah, and she's up there in the land. The land of fruitfulness. Yeah, it's like, if you don't see a garden there, it's all over it. Yeah, and then Jael down there in the valley, and then of course Jael though is the interesting character because who's she the husband of? Yeah, a Kenite or a Canaanite, a descendant of Cain. So when we encounter that, we should be like, uh-oh. And yet, this is one of those cool twists in the Bible. So if you said, okay, we got a descendant of Cain, are they going to be a seed of the serpent or a seed of the woman? What'd you think? You think of the seed of the serpent, yeah. Because, I mean, read Genesis chapter 4. Yeah. You read Genesis chapter 4, and it's like none of Cain's family turns out well. You know what I mean? It's just bad gets worse. You know, that's the whole idea of it. And so we encounter this wife of a descendant of Cain, and it's like, what's going to happen here? And then it's like, wait a minute. So the seed of the serpent, who we think would be the seed of the serpent, actually becomes the seed of the woman who does the crushing of the snake. It's like, what? Which is such a cool story. I even just look at that and just look at God's redemption. God's going to use, Joel 3:12, for all who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. The only qualification is call upon the Lord. It's all. It's anybody. Even the one that you would not think it's going to be that. And then we find out that it's the descendant of Moses' brother-in-law. Even more. It's like, wait a minute. So we've had this connection going all the way back. Intriguing. So it just makes the things. Oh yeah, the chariots in Egypt, and yeah, and they're in the. Yeah, in the water, exactly, in the river Kishon and the Wadi, and yeah, it's like, come on now, we know what's going down. This is a replay of the Red Sea. It's just such cool. Yeah, just so many cool things in that story. So, So kind of a question to ask is, why am I doing this? I was reflecting on that and listened to a podcast earlier this week, and just kind of in my own mind, like, what's going on? And I was fascinated. There's a podcast, a guy, he's wrote a book, he's a pastor now, but he did not come out of a Christian background at all. In fact, knew nothing really of Christ, and now he wrote a book, How Not to Read the Bible. Actually, it's his book entitled. That's been pre-COVID even. But just hearing his story a little bit and his faith story and journey. But yeah, so if my goal is, if you pick up on one thing, one little tidbit that just makes the story better, makes the story deeper, have more meaning, hey, that's kind of my goal in doing all this. It just makes it worth more depth to it. So, all right, so we're going to look at the Torah as narrative covenant agreement, a covenant agreement versus a law. And we talked about, again, kind of a quick replay. If this was law, this is like law how we view it, statutory law. It's just not good. It's bad because we don't see it actually happening, right? We see none of the decisions actually carried out the way the law says to do them. We see decisions carried out that are sometimes contrary to the law or don't have anything to do whatsoever with the law. I think about Solomon. Solomon's decision, one of the greatest, wisest decisions of all the Bible. And he's going to cut a baby in half. Now, where did he get that from the law? There ain't nothing in the Torah that says anything about cutting babies in half. If you don't know who the baby's parents are, cut them in half and you'll find out. That is not one of the 613, in case you're wondering. It's not, but what's he doing? He's applying the principles, the wisdom principles. And so we're even going to see that Torah, the teachings, become just as much wisdom principles as they are an actual, not really law. And so it's a covenant agreement between God and his people and how they're going to interact, and that's what he's calling them out to do here. Again, we looked at the requirements for judges, Leviticus 19:15. It has nothing to do with knowing the Torah. It doesn't even mention the Torah. It says what they're to do right. They're to do just things in that. So we'll look at a couple others, again, kind of illustrating this, but also starting to look at even the context of the Torah instructions being given, the teachings. Because as we see things go through, we're going to see some changes happening. And so what is one of the most important days for the Israelite people? If you are Jewish, Orthodox Jewish, and devout Jewish, what is one of the most important days? So important that you celebrate it weekly. The Sabbath, exactly. So Shabbat. And so they're going to, every seventh day, they celebrate that. Where do they get that from? Where does that come from? Creation, yes, but where's the command given? Yeah, it's in the Ten Commandments. There we go. Exodus 20, 8 through 12, and it's quite the lengthy passage here. It says, remember, and I highlighted in red because that's important, remember the day of the Shabbat, the Sabbath, to consecrate it. 6 days you will work, and you will do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your God. You will not do any work, you, your son, or your daughter, your male slave, or your female slave, or your animal, or your alien who's in your gates. Why? Let me tell you. Because in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and on the seventh day he rested. Therefore Yahweh blessed the seventh day and consecrated it. So why do we celebrate the Sabbath? Why do we remember the Sabbath? Well, because on the seventh day, after God did all his work of creation, he rested on the seventh day. And we talked about that Wednesday night, about the rest, and it ain't mean God taking a nap. It's the idea that as a king, a ruler, he sat down on his throne and he begins to rule. The work of creation is done, and now the real work, the real task is ruling. And he sat down and he's going to rule now. We see that. I guess sometimes people say God gave them rest from all their enemies. Well, they still did stuff. It just meant that they were no longer involved in the battle. Now they're able to do what they were called when they went to the promised land. Now they get to enjoy the land. And so that's this idea of this rest. It's now to reflect on that. And even then, what is one thing unique about the seventh day in the order of creation? Nothing new is created, right? But there's also something that's missing on the seventh day. So every day of creation, God says a couple things. He says it was good, and it was evening and morning, the first day. Guess what we don't have on day 7? We don't have an ending to it. It's an unending day. So the idea is that really, if you think about it, and again, in the context of God sitting down and ruling, well, his rule doesn't end. There is no end to the day of rest, that seventh day. Maybe even Jewish commentators and scholars will say that they believe that that's this idea that there was never to be an end to the Sabbath rest. It was supposed to be a Sabbath forever, as opposed to what happened with Adam and Eve. They had to go out into the wilderness where they worked the land and they toiled. It's not rest. So they would have been working on the seventh, per se, but not toiling, not the same way. It would have been a completely different aspect in that. So yeah, we see that doesn't have an end to it. So why do they want to celebrate that? Remember the Sabbath because of the seventh day rest. Now, what have they just come out of? This is Exodus 20, so where are they at? But at a specific place. Mount Sinai, yeah. So they're camped out at Mount Sinai. Then they're hearing God and the Ten Commandments. How did they get them? Moses did bring them down, but first, God gave them how? He spoke these, yeah. And this freaked them out. It was after this, they're like, no more. Don't give us any more. Look, Moses, you go up there, you get them for God, and you come back and tell us, because that freaks us out, man. That's just weird. We don't want to hear God talking to us. So they were scared of that. So they've just come from where? Egypt. What were they in Egypt? They were slaves, yeah. So think about that. What was their work like? They toiled, didn't they? Did they get any rest? No, they weren't getting no rest. No, and so this is for their setting here, they've come out, and now they're getting some rest, okay? And not only that, who is king? God, yeah. Who was king? Pharaoh. Where's Pharaoh at? Well, now he's at the bottom of the Red Sea. yeah, somewhere. I mean, we assume Pharaoh got caught up in the flood. We don't know. I don't know. Maybe he got out and, staying on the shore going, oh, my gosh, what just happened here? We don't know. We really don't know what happened with Pharaoh there, particularly. But Pharaoh was the king, and he ain't no more, right? Who's the king? God. He's sitting on his throne ruling. So they've just come out of that context, and so it's remember the day of the Sabbath. Remember that seventh day. And what's also going on with them? So where are they getting the food? From God, yeah. So this idea of the seventh with the Sabbath is they're not doing any work because who are they relying on? God for their daily provision. Literally, on day 6, they get twice as much food. So they don't have to even cook. They're not to cook. They're to think about God and to rely on God and all of that. And so looking at that principle for them, man, it's a complete shift in their dynamic of their lifestyle has completely changed. So that's where the Sabbath comes into play, where it begins. So we move forward to Deuteronomy, which Deuteronomy means second law, so it's just a repeat for the most part of everything we've already gotten. So if the Sabbath is such an important day, and it is, right? To the point we celebrate it every single week. If it is so important, when we get a replay of it again in Deuteronomy, as we're getting ready to go into the promised land, what should it look like? It should be the same, right? Because it's the same thing. We've been celebrating this every single day. So We'll see what Deuteronomy 5:12 says. Observe the Sabbath day. It doesn't say remember. It says, now, John, remember, observe. It's like the same thing. I mean, sort of, but it's a different word. And it's a different word in Hebrew, too. It's not just in English, okay? Observe the Sabbath day to make it holy, just as Yahweh your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall work, and you shall do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath unto Yahweh your God. You shall not do any work, or your son, or your daughter, or your slave woman, or your ox, or your donkey, or any of your domestic animals, or your resident alien who is in your towns. Why? So that your slave and your slave woman may rest as you rest. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And Yahweh your God brought you out with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yahweh your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath. There's nothing to do with the seventh day in there, is there? It's a completely different reason we're given all of a sudden. Why is that? Not only that, is even our list is a little bit different. So we even split it out here. Before it says your animal, or the alien within your gates. Now it's your ox, your donkey, any of your domestic animals, or your resident alien who's in your towns. It's even more detail given to us. And then, why do we do this? To give your slaves rest, too. Remember, you were slaves once, too. Keep that in mind. All right, remember versus observe. Remember, to recall to the mind with effort, to think of again. To have something arise in one's memory, become aware of something suddenly or spontaneously, or to retain in your memory. So again, that's the idea of remember. Remember the day of the Sabbath. Thinking back to that day 7 of creation, okay? Observe, to be or become aware of, especially through careful or directed attention, notice. It's like an active remembrance, okay? To watch attentively. Again, these are verbs that are being used here. To make a systematic or scientific observation of. So contrasting those two. Remember versus bring to mind, recall back, because remember what happened, what God did, and observe is now it's actually taking an active part in doing it. You're making something happen here, okay? And then again, the reason in that. Where are they about to go? Deuteronomy, where are they at? On the border of Canaan. Getting ready to go into the promised land. How long has it been? Yeah, it's been 40 years, yeah. So everybody that Moses is talking to at this point, they've never known slavery, have they? Except as what? As slave masters. They've got slaves themselves. And so they're getting ready to go in the promised land, and they've heard the stories about being slaves in Egypt, but they've never been a slave in they've never been slaves themselves. They've been slave masters. And so it's a reminder that, hey, you need to, because this is one of those moments that people look at this and say, see, the Bible, it's for slavery, it's for, trampling on women, it's for all these reasons to say that. But when you read this is a culture, they're in a culture, in a world in which slavery is a commonplace occurrence, okay? In a place where women have no rights. They are property, They are they're slightly elevated above the slave. Slightly in some cultures, not even that maybe. Some cultures, the male slave might have more rights than the wife might have, okay? And yet God is interacting with them where they're at, in their culture, but he calls them to be different. Because what if he left this whole thing about the whole slave part out? Well, then you can say, well, yeah, we're going to observe a Sabbath, but my slaves are just going to do their thing. No, he's saying, no, this needs to apply to everybody in your community. Okay? This is across the board with everybody. And so, again, he's talking to a different group of people, giving them the same command, but with a different context. Because it's not the same people that 40 years ago got the command to do this. And their ears, again, is different. We had those coming out where Pharaoh was king, and they got all the provisions from Pharaoh even. Think about that. As slaves, where do they get the provisions from? They got them from the master. They got them from Pharaoh, okay? And God is saying, hey, no, look, I'm the one you get your provisions from. Remember, I'm the one that made everything. They also come out of a culture where they've been, how long are they slaves in Egypt? 400 years. Yeah, do you think they knew Egyptian mythology and Egyptian stories and all that? You think that might not have been taught a little bit every once in a while about how creation happened? And read the Egyptian mythology, creation mythology. There's some freaky stuff going down. And God's like, no, remember, I'm the one that did this. There's nothing that happened down that Nile River. That Nile River ain't nothing special. I made that Nile, you know? Remember that. And then we're getting ready to go in. Remember you were slaves. Keep that in mind as you're going into this. And then how did they get to freedom? With God's outstretched arm. You see that a lot. And so there's a lot of pictures of, especially in Egypt, Pharaoh with his arm outstretched. Now, this isn't a good one. I couldn't find what it was. I got one somewhere. I saw it once, and it's Pharaoh like this with his arm out. The idea is that he's sticking his arm out over that, and it's that strong hand, the outstretched arm, is a symbol of strength and battle. Sometimes you'll see in the hieroglyphics of Egypt, you'll see Pharaoh, this giant figure, and then you'll see all the people that they vanquished over as little bitty people. You know, it's because this is symbol of, I'm the big, strong guy. You know, and this God reminding them, it's my strong hand, my outstretched arm that brought you out. Why are you on the border of Canaan? Because I did this. And so, you know what? I want you to think about that. So on the Sabbath, just take a moment and pause. Where's all this come from? Why are we in the position we're in? Oh, yeah, it's because of God. And how do we get here? Because God, it's out his right arm, his strong right arm, his outstretched hand. What did he do? He brought us out. He's the one that delivered us from this. So it's a completely different context. So again, if this was a law, as we view a law, it changed. There's an amendment to the law. The code has been changed. But it isn't. It's this idea of the principle. So then how would you apply that? We'll kind of venture into this. Then how would you apply that to us? Because we love that, when we talk about the law, it's so fun. We like talking about the law, and we say, well, we don't adhere to that's the Levitical law. We don't adhere to all that stuff. We still have the Ten Commandments. Okay. All 10 of them. Yeah, we adhere to all 10 of them. Okay, what about the Sabbath? The Sabbath is not Sunday. And this is a question that kids will pick up on, especially as you're going through, little kids will pick up, they're like, wait a minute. Why do we go to church on Sunday? Because I thought I just learned in Sunday school that the Sabbath was Saturday. It's the seventh day, and that's not what we... So we not adhere to the Ten Commandments? Do we adhere to the... What's going on here? So what is the principle you think we could gain from this? What is the underlying principle behind the Sabbath? He gives two of them to that particular people group. But what do you think is the underlying thing that applies with the Sabbath, this idea of the Sabbath? Now, Sabbath means rest, by the way. It does mean rest. Mm-hmm. To remember who provides. Yeah, we do that on Sunday. That's why, if you wonder why do we have church on Sunday versus Saturday, it's Resurrection Day. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is the disciples would have done both days. They would have observed the Sabbath, gone to the local synagogue, celebrate Shabbat, and then they would have celebrated with their fellow Christian believers on Sunday, Resurrection Day. So they would have kind of had a dual worship. They worship 2 days. So we got remembrance. Remember Christ, what he's done. Remember to get closer to God. Yeah, to take a rest. And to me, I think it's the idea of just setting aside time and saying, hey, who's in charge of us? Because it's so easy, especially here in the Western culture. It is so easy for us to say, even here in America, I'm a self-made man, and this idea of, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, it's this, the American pride, aspect of things. And it's so easy to get caught up in that and not to argue that, hey, we shouldn't be working hard and we shouldn't be doing all this stuff, but just take a moment and pause and say, okay, but it all comes from God. And in this moment, I'm just going to rest on that. And I'm going to think about that. And what can I do, maybe make a change in my life? What can I do in my life that in this moment shows both to myself, because it's just much for me, but also shows God that, hey, I'm going to rely on faith on you, and I'm going to set aside myself for you. And you're the one that's in charge. What does that look like? I think for every person, it can look different. I think even of, okay, so what about this aspect? How many plants, and I'm not arguing that they're doing anything wrong, but machinery. And this is going to be a really big question we get into ethically down the road with AI, about what's real and what's not, and what's alive and what's not. But machinery, equipment runs all 24/7. Sometimes that's not the greatest thing for it, right? It wears out too. Are we? What's the principle that we can get to with that? Say, okay, is there something I can even do work-wise and say, hey, is this maybe better a work situation as an overall approach to even shut the plant down for a day? What's that look like? Again, and I'm not arguing that, that we've got plants that run 24/7. I know in some plants, like I know Spartan. Yeah, and Spartan same way. They don't. Yeah, when you shut the smelters down at Spartan, it takes a long time to turn back on. Yeah, so in some aspects there is that, but just looking at that, just pondering that, and just taking a moment to ponder and say, okay, how can I apply a Sabbath principle in that? Because we don't observe the Sabbath, huh? Yeah, some of that stuff, and then how can I provide the preventative maintenance in my own life? And just looking at that again, what can I do in this moment that says, God, I am relying on you? What would it be like to wake up, like them on that morning on the Sabbath, and there was no food? The first time, it's going to be a little bit, man, can you imagine that first day they woke up, and some went out looking for it, and it's like, man, we know I got that manna in the cabinet, but it wasn't good yesterday when we pulled it out, we threw the leftovers out because it rotted. Is it still going to be there today? Well, can you imagine that leap of faith, that even that question in your heart at that moment, because wait, it's not like we can just run down the store, So again, just how can you, in your own life, what's the principle behind that? And that's really what we're starting getting into with this idea of the Torah, what it is, how does it apply to us? Because it changed, the application changed depending on the setting that they were in and the people in which it was given. The principle didn't change, but the application was changing. And so that's what we really want to be looking at. So, okay. Another very important one, and this was next. Well, I'd already planned this out even before we knew when Passover was going to fall. So, but what again then is one of the next most important days on the Jewish calendar? Passover. We're going to celebrate that on Tuesday. So, where does Passover instituted? Well, it's when they got ready to leave Egypt, right? So Exodus 12, 8, and 9. We're going to look at something fun here with this. Remember I mentioned the idea of translational bias a while back when we were talking about that, and how sometimes the translations will change based on, you'll see different words, and there's going to be some bias that's built into it. It's the nature of it, okay? We're going to see that tonight. Now, does anybody use the RSV? I was thinking somebody did. I thought you had. Okay, I thought you were the one that had. Okay, so the RSV is the one that actually, believe it or not, RSV is the one that I would say in these two sections is going to get it right. But we'll look at what the Hebrew word here for some of these stuff is, and look at that. So Exodus 12, 8, and 9. Remember, the death angel is coming that night. They are to sacrifice the lamb, to paint the blood on the doorpost, and they're told how to eat it. So Exodus 12, 8, 9 says this: they shall eat the flesh that night, roasted with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled with water, but roasted. Its head with its legs and its inner parts. Basically, they were to slit its throat, drain the blood, and stick it on a stick and roast it. They weren't even to gut it, which is kind of weird. I don't roll like that, but, but that's what they were to do, okay? So how were they to cook it? Roasted. How are they not to cook it? Do not boil, right? Do not boil. Pretty clear. We don't boil it. All right. The word. So this is Blue Letter Bible. It's just interlinear here, so which is, I apologize, it's kind of fuzzy up there. So right down here at the bottom, boiled, all right? Bashal is the Hebrew word. And so it says, do not eat any of it raw or boiled. So again, do not bashal. Plain, clear, right? In English, Hebrew, doesn't matter. Don't bashal. Don't eat it boiled. Here's bashal. The definition of bashal. So there's to boil, to cook, to bake, roast. Those other ones they've kind of, I think we probably actually included those other ones in there because of a translational issue, okay? But it is to boil or to cook, to boil, or to ripen. It also is used to help with ripened grain, which you kind of think about when the grain is done, it's cooked and pops open kind of aspect of things. I think of even giving birth, the kid's done, right? He's popped out. Okay, so Exodus 12, 8, 9. Do not boil. I think we all got that right. Is there any confusion on how we cook the Passover lamb? Because there's going to be confusion. All right, Deuteronomy 16:7. Again, we're getting ready to go into the promised land. We're getting all this again. And you shall boil it. Now, here's what's fun. Everybody grab your Bible, turn to Deuteronomy 16:7. See what it says. We know what Maryland says. It's right there. Let's use a different version, a different year or something like that. Yeah. And you got what? New King James? All right, New King James is roast. You shall cook it. We're not going to go there. It's not boiled, but this is called, we ain't going there. We're just going to ignore it, and we're not going to address it, okay? That's what that is. All right? Roast, and you have what? NIV, yeah. Roast it. Uh-huh. Anybody else have anything different, NIV or ESV? They all either say, aside from RSV, they all either say roast or cook. Which the cook one, I'm like, y'all are just skating out of it. Come on now. So what does it actually say? You shall cook and eat it. And cook is, what's that word right there? Bashal, which means what? Boil. You shall boil it. Boil. Not roast. Boil. Huh. 12:8-9. Do not boil. Deuteronomy 16:7. Boil it and eat it. Wonder what's going on there. So guess what? We have another situation that we record the Passover being performed. Okay? Flash forward to King Josiah. Now, King Josiah is what? Good king, bad king? Good king, yeah. And actually one of the best kings. He's actually at the end. What? He did. Oh, he did follow the law. And we're going to see that. He followed it. Yeah, exactly. So one of the best kings that they had. He's actually at the very end of it. He dies, and then it just all goes south from there. So he is going to be celebrating the Passover in 2 Chronicles chapter 35. And and none of them will say, are going to say this. This is the Lexham English. It says, then they roasted the Passover lamb in the fire according to the ordinance, and they boiled the holy offerings in pots and kettles and dishes and brought it quickly to the lay people. But what it actually says there, it says, and they bashal the Passover with fire. They boiled it with fire. How do you boil something with fire? Well, there's that, but you're boiling it. You're not boiling it with fire, because how else are you going to, they don't have an oven, you know? So, and you're not, yeah. Yeah, so it's boiled with fire. And jokingly, I put this in there, broil? They fried it. So we got three things going on here. So we got Exodus 12:8-9, where it's instituted, where it is created, where the first time we had the Passover, do not boil it. Roast it. 40 years later, we're going to boil it. And then a few hundred years later after that, we boil it with fire. So what's going on? So again, let's look at the context. Let's see what's going on in the story. Because not only is this covenant agreement, but it's also narrative. It is part of their story. And so and you have to understand it. You got to have the background. So Exodus 12:8-9, where are they at? What's going to happen that night? They're leaving. Yeah. What else do they eat with Passover? What's the bread? Unleavened bread. Why is it unleavened? We ain't got time for it to rise. Exactly. And so this is urgency. So to boil it, you're going to do what? You're going to skin it out. You're going to clean it out. You're going to chop it up. You're going to put it in the pot. You got to get your water hot. And if anybody knows what happens with the watch pot, it never boils. You know? I mean, that is the worst thing in the world is when you need your water to boil for your noodles because you forgot to turn it on. You already got your sauce made. Your bread's already done. Your garlic bread is ready. And your noodles aren't cooked yet. And you're like, come on, turn it up. And you just it ain't boiling. It won't boil. It won't boil. You ain't got time for that. Okay? So what are you going to stick that lamb on the fire and you're going to cook him and be done with it. Deuteronomy, where are they at? They're out in the desert. Actually, and in this setting, some of them are where? They're living in towns. because we've already had the battle against Og, king of Bashan. We've already taken over his territory. Not all the tribes actually enter into the promised land itself. Some of them stay on the other side of the Jordan. They said, hey, look, we're cool with this land. And they asked Moses, is it okay if we stay over here? We already got cities. We got villages. Our families are living in houses. We really don't want to. Look, everybody's moved. Like, Moses, we've moved in 40 years. Do we really got to move again? Like, we got a roof over our head for the first time ever, and we're kind of cool with that. We kind of like that. If I tell my wife that we got to pack up again and move back into a tent, she's not going to be happy with me, you know? And so is there an urgency for the second recording of the Passover? There's no urgency. No. We're going to celebrate it as a celebration, so we have time to boil it. We got time for the water to cook, all right? Now, that is nothing for us for 2 Chronicles, nothing for Josiah, except that Josiah is a good king, right? He discovers the law. He's the Torah. He's teaching it. He's enlightened by it. He's got all kinds of, so much cool stuff that's going on there. One of the greatest kings ever, destroys the high places. He's like full on. He's God's man. He's going to do it the right way. And so to do it the right way, how would you do it the right way? Do you boil it or do you roast it? Which one? You do it both ways. Exactly. You know how righteous Josiah is? He boils it and roasts it. He does it both ways. Now, I don't know if that's the truth, but I think that may be what's going on there. I think that's what the author of Chronicles is saying. You know how righteous and holy Josiah is? You know how much he adheres to the law, the Torah? He adheres to the Torah so much that he's going to do it both ways. He's going to follow both recorded accounts of how to do it, because he wants to make sure he gets it right, so he does it both ways. And so we can see kind of the details of the story. But I remember I talked about translational bias. Why do you think we skip over that? Well, sometimes we just don't want to address it, because we know it's going to be, that raises a question, right? But this is where I say sometimes it's okay to have these questions. And honestly, it's that kind of stuff that really, I think, does a little bit of disservice. Because then people start questioning stuff and asking things and saying, well, wait a minute, but the Bible says this, but that's not what it says. And so it raises some question in our minds. It's like, well, can I trust what the Bible says? The answer is yes, you can trust your Bible. You know, I hope you understand that I'm not arguing against any of the translations we've got, but it is a translation, and there's going to be things that pop up in that, and we have to understand that and understand what it is, what it's not. But yeah, don't shy away from that. Even highlighting the idea that a descendant of Cain shows up in the promised land. There's a little problem with that, because what's already happened? A flood. Should there be any descendants of Cain? No. But we also have giants, descendants of the Nephilim. Should we have those after the flood? No. But we do. There is, and there's all kinds of, read First Enoch, read Enoch and find out some of the stories that went along with that. And it's a question that the Jewish people themselves asked, okay? And it's okay to ask those questions. Don't shy away from those things. Ask them. Wonder about that. And what's God trying to be curious what God's trying to tell you about that? For me, I just think it's so awesome that God's going to use the descendant of Cain, like the first wicked person, you could argue, and his whole family line was a mess. He's going to use that to deliver his people. That's so awesome. You talk about redemption. There's a redemption story for you right there. I think that's so cool in that. Likewise with this. Okay, so what are we trying to learn? Josiah was righteous, He's going to try to do it right. Did he boil it with fire? No. He roasted it or boiled it? I don't know which, but one of those two, because you can't do boil with fire. It doesn't work, okay, unless you broil. So I don't know. Maybe we've got the creation of the broiler. Huh? Yeah, do not eat it raw. And they did not eat it raw. It was cooked. Yeah, exactly. So, again, just this idea of just the context of it, too. We see how the detail changed with the context of the story. But has Passover and what it represents changed? No. It's still the same. This is not creating an inconsistency in the Bible. This is not creating an inconsistency in what they were doing. I would argue, again, actually, it's more interactive, because this isn't God just giving them a command from up high. This is God giving them a command where they're at, because he relates to his people. He interacts with us. And this is what's cool. God doesn't ask us to come to him, like as far as to his level. Hope you know what I'm saying. He comes to ours. Think about that. We ain't holy. We can't be holy.
but Jesus was, and he came down to us, and in his humility, and became humbled in that. And so I look at that and say, man, that's so cool that God is going to interact with us the way we are, fallen, stupid dirt critters. And he's going to use us. That's so cool. And that should, should humble us. I almost said humiliate us. At times it does that too. Any questions on that? Well, there's just two little stories, two little snippets, but very detailed. And like I said, this is why you say, well, then why do we care about what the Hebrew is? Because you would have missed that. And I think you would have missed some of the context of it. And then if you don't get that, then you wouldn't have gotten that. And to me, that just elevates Josiah even more. Says, you know how righteous Josiah was, how devout Josiah was? Yeah, he went all the way. And you would have missed that little detail of the story. Yeah, we can find out that, he did according to the ordinance. And I think you even get a hint there. According to the ordinance, well, which one? Which ordinance? We had two of them. And that word there is bashal. And so it says, they bashal the Passover lamb in fire, and they bashal the holy offerings. So it's in there twice. Translator just said, yeah, I don't know what to do with that. We're just going to leave it as roast, because that's the most likely thing. So. Yes, they boiled the other. Yeah, they put the other. Yeah, exactly. So again, which one's right? Well, it depends on the setting. That one was right for Exodus 12:8-9. That one was right for there. And so what's the right one there? Josiah said, yeah, it was right to do both ways there. So. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there was any concessions necessary for Passover, but the idea of Passover was it was a community thing. So it was to invite. Same thing with the Shabbat meal, Sabbath meal. So it was actually, it was intended for you to invite your neighbors. And everybody got together and gathered together and shared in that abundance. What has God given us? And the same thing with Passover, been the same thing there. So, in fact, I think it even says if they couldn't afford something, I don't know. I know some of that is if any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor. Haven't taken into account the number of people there. So, yeah. So it was a community aspect in that. Be inside the house. When they do that, do not eat the meat raw or cooked in water, but roast it over the fire. So if they couldn't afford it or they didn't have one, if they were too small, because again, it was they weren't to leave anything. If there was anything left, there was no leftovers, you must burn it. It must be completely consumed. That was the idea of that within the Passover lamb. So, yeah. Maybe come Tuesday night. Might get some. I don't know. We will have some bitter herbs Tuesday night. So there is that. So any other questions? That is a good stop spot. We will pick up in 2 weeks, not next week, but in 2 weeks. We're going to pick up, and we're looking at some buckets. So we're going to put everything in, okay? Just a helpful way to, as you're reading the laws, of what to decide what to do with them, because there's some weird stuff in there, okay? The one that everybody loves to go with. And again, why is it important to kind of understand what this really is? One of the favorite things that people, it's low-hanging fruit. That's what it is. But you go online, you find these groups, these people that are getting on there, and they're the atheist group or whatever, and they're going to go, well, yeah, you all don't follow your own Bible because you wear polyblend. It clearly says you shouldn't wear clothes made of two different kinds of fabric. And it's like, okay, well, what exactly are we talking about? Why is that there? And so they're missing out on the why. And for us to be able to have the why, say, hey, it's an opportunity to engage with somebody and say, hey, you are absolutely correct. We don't do that. But you know what's really behind that? You know why they did that? Let me tell you why they did that. And you can lead into that, and then it's a conversation starter with somebody. It's probably a conversation ender, in all honesty, because it's low-hanging fruit, and they're just picking because they're your internet warriors. And in a one-on-one conversation, they ain't going to have that conversation with you because they're going to be like, oh, yeah, well, that's stupid, and then they're going to leave. Yo mama, and then out the door they go. So that's a yo mama thing. I mean, yo mama is all over the internet, okay, just so you know. There's a lot of yo mama comments, especially when you get in these kinds of conversations. You'll have a lot of that because they don't know what to do. And when you get back into a corner, what yo mama? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so yo mama is just when somebody's insulting somebody or something like that, it's like, well, yeah, well, something like, your mom was fat. Well, your mom was fat. That's kind of it's a yo mama. It's just, yeah, well, you're stupid. Well, your mom's stupid. That's just because I got nothing else. What am I going to do? I have no comeback to you, so I just got to come up with something dumb, And you see that that is something. If you're in a debate with somebody, and I've painfully learned this lesson. If you're in a debate with somebody and you get somebody backed into a corner, you need to recognize that first before you get to that point. But if you get somebody backed into a corner, that's the kind of response you're going to get. And at that moment, there is no further conversation you can have. You should have stopped already. But you backed them up so far they cannot respond to you anymore, and you humiliated them. And there's that's bad debate skills for one. We think it is good debate, and that's what we want to do. I beat you. But you've lost in that moment. I say painfully, I've been guilty of that far too many times. Back in some of that point, even family members, and I realized that. I was like, ooh, I'm starting to be better at recognizing before I get to that point as opposed to step too late. But yeah. Yeah, but watch over the yo moments. But yeah, so we're going to look at that. We're going to look at some of the laws. I encourage you to read some Torah. I do encourage you to read that. We're looking at the context. What's the story? When you're reading through it, look at what the story happens before and what happens afterwards, okay? It's going to give you clues to why we have that new instruction, okay? God gives a lot of these instructions as a result of something or because of something that's coming up, okay? Again, he's working with his people where they're at, okay? I'm not saying God is responding to them, but he's responding to them, if that makes sense what I'm saying, okay? It's not that they're driving the bus. It's like, oh, my gosh, God, I got to come up with a new law now because they just did that. I wouldn't have thought. No, it's not what he's doing. But it's because of their actions. Like, okay. And we see both directions. Like I said, we'll see it before and after times, in preparation and then in response to. So we'll look at that. So any other questions or anything? Okay. I hope next time will be fun looking at that. But I think it's fun just reading the Bible stories as a whole and looking at what's out there. So, okay. All right.